I am an anarchist not because I believe anarchism is the final goal, but because I believe there is no such thing as a final goal. Freedom will lead us to continually wider and expanding understanding and to new forms of social life. Rudolf Rocker, The London Years. The Daily Grind, Chapter 223. The back room of any space that a person frequented but didn't really work at was always something that fascinated James. Not that he'd ever spent time daydreaming in class about what was in the janitor's closets or the mystical upstairs of the grocery store, but, well, maybe he had. Just a little daydreaming. There was an invisible social barrier there. Not a magic shield, but something that kept people out anyway, which invited the question of what was so important that it needed to be kept secret. What strange and important things were kept in the back that made every employee door feel like a mystery to be solved? The answer, as he'd gotten older, had been disappointing, as most answers about the world were. What was so important? Kitchen stuff, storage, maybe some offices, normal, boring, mundane things. But each time he stepped into a new place, there was a feeling like being in a stranger's house. Like even though he'd seen a commercial kitchen a dozen times from a dozen jobs, this one was something new and unique. That feeling came back the instant he vaulted over the cafe's front counter. He'd been coming here for years, since he first moved to the no longer nearby apartment, since before he lost Sarah, since before he found the dungeon. And after that, too. After everything. He'd always had a place to go to get coffee, where he was on friendly terms and recognized with a smile, but still kind of an outsider, even as he was tipping with skill orbs and bringing dungeon life to hang out just for fun. And now he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Somewhere that could be a mystery. The kitchen didn't have a door, just an open arch that was done up with faux brick to make the place look older and more rustic than it really was. The back area was a standard cramped cafe kitchen, complete with a set of dirty stainless steel counters and racks of stored baked goods and plastic bins. It also did feel properly mysterious, as the rainbow light from Harlan's tattoo parrot perched on a ventilation pipe overhead and made the whole place look iridescent. "What's going on?" James's yell competed for space with the ongoing scream of terror. He swept his gaze across the dozen people left, trying to triangulate what was happening, and it wasn't hard. They were mostly all pressing back against one of the walls, while under the rainbow lights somebody writhed on the floor on the opposite side. It was a bit hard to tell, what with the fact that Harlan had shot someone and another man had lost an arm not even an hour ago, but there was the smell of fresh blood in the air. James gulped back a gag as he hurried over to where the EMT—he really needed to ask this guy his name—was crouched over one of the students who had made a break for it earlier. "What's happening?" James demanded. The EMT looked up, a protective blue mask over his mouth and gloves on his hands. "Guy started babbling, collapsed, high fever. He's got, well, this." He turned over one of the student's arms, a cutaway sleeve showing oozing sores on his skin. "Did this guy have a bag? Any medications?" The EMT was calling out to the others, but they weren't listening. Instead, there was another yell, another scream, really, as the crowd of people tried to push away from someone else who had just fallen to the floor. The other student James recognized as one of the lucky, uninjured ones who had run earlier. "Everyone calm down," someone bellowed. James bellowed. He caught himself off guard, his words coming out more forceful and aggressive than he'd really meant. But the sound and force of the words dragged everyone's attention to him, made them listen. "Step away from her. You're their friend. Are they on medications they need? Is this normal?" The last guy in their group, a fairly young Asian man with big round glasses, who was crouched over his friend as the rest of the cafe scurried away, looked up at James with a strained expression. "No, nothing. Her arms are bleeding, and I don't feel good. Everyone should get away. Get away. Get away from us. I feel sick." He said the last sentence like it was an amusing revelation, the same way a person would say, "Oh hey, I found $5 in my wallet." Shit. Harlan was already back out of the room at that sentence. James didn't blame them. "Okay, everyone stay calm. Move back out to the main hall. thing, dining area. We'll keep them here. We'll make sure they're okay, but get comfortable. If you feel yourself getting feverish, lay down. Don't fall and hit your head. Any other advice? He asked the EMT. Anything we need here? Water, but we don't have running water, just the bottles up front, the man said. Just stay away from each other. We don't know what this is, but it's likely we're already all infected if it's airborne. So, yeah, sit down. Stay hydrated if you can. I've got some Tylenol in my purse, an older blonde woman with a face full of piercings offered. She caught a nod from the EMT and ran to go grab it, but she was the only one who offered anything. Well, if we run out of bottles, the toilet tanks are going to have water in them, James muttered. What are the odds that's safe to drink now? 0, the EMT said as James crouched next to him. James, right? You said earlier, I think. I just want to make sure. James nodded and took the spare set of latex gloves the other man offered him from a back pocket. Yeah, that's me. You? Johns. J-Club, represent. The word had the cadence of an old joke James wasn't privy to. He shrugged at the lack of reaction as he got James to slide him the cafe's first aid kit and started wrapping gauze around the student's arms. The kid was the same age as him, really. Check on them, Johns pointed to the other two, ignoring a weak moan from the guy he was treating. James did, stopping the woman who tried to come too close to hand him a water bottle and had her roll it and the painkillers across the tiled floor, just in case. Well, he took a second to make sure neither of the other two had hit anything vital when they'd collapsed. The girl had a rapidly growing bruise on her forehead. Her friend was okay, though, except for the fact that James could feel their fevers even through his sweaty palms, and the smell of blood was intensifying as the lesions opened up along their arms like their skin was magnetically charged in opposition to itself. Got any more bandages? He asked Johns, looking up after he'd arranged the two in a somewhat more comfortable position with a folded coat and a sack of coffee beans under their heads for pillows. No, and I'm not feeling great already, Johns said. He didn't make any attempts to hide the anxiety and fear in his voice. This is bad. This is too fast. If this spreads, everyone probably has it. Said... You said we were somewhere dangerous. Is this what you meant? Never like this before. James's voice was quiet, but there was no noise to cover it up now. No buzz of lights or whir of air conditioning or anything but the occasional frightened word or cry from the other half of the cafe. It's never a disease. Fuck, man, I sent people out. I sent them back. James felt a throb of a headache. I have never fucked up so badly this fast before. He looked down at where blood was starting to well up from the sores in the arms of the two med school students. Are there any more bandages? He asked again, and got no answer. Johns? James looked over. The man was sitting against the back door, half concealed by the big gray garbage can. I'm good, he muttered back drowsily. I just need a minute. James stood and made his way over to him, sitting on the dirty kitchen floor with his back against several unopened cardboard boxes full of sugar? Probably sugar. The man across from him looked ashen, even under the green and purple and red lights of the obediently lingering magical macaw. You don't look good, James said. I think the Tylenol's actually helping. I'm gonna sit, then try to get those two to swallow some too. If it spreads by touch, at least we're it, though. If it's airborne... John swiveled his head to stare at James. There's not enough for everyone. Oh shit, you. You need to... I'll make it, James said, with utter confidence. If 200 milligrams of acetaminophen was going to be the difference, then I'll make it. He paused. Give me the pills. I'll find a way to make those two take them somehow. It took an effort of will to move again, and more to get the half-unconscious, half-delirious students to choke down the Tylenol. One each, all they had left. There hadn't been anything else in the first aid kit, and no one had volunteered anything from their own bags. He stumbled his way back to the EMT, who was starting to breathe heavily. You should get your arms wrapped with something before... James trailed off. Wrapped with what exactly? Maybe he could cut one of the stained aprons into strips when he could stand up again. It had been so long since James had been into a dungeon without being properly supplied. First aid, weaponry, things like the exercise potion in his pocket. To be in a situation where he didn't even have bandages was bizarre to him. Arguably, he had only ever really been in a dungeon this underprepared once. He'd come back with a crowbar the second time, at least. He realized he was rambling about it when Johns interrupted. Man, you got healing potions and... They're not healing potions, James thought he said. Then he decided to close his eyes for a little bit, as his headache got progressively worse and his arms started to itch under the multiple shield bracers he was wearing. He didn't really hear what John said next. James was familiar with being sick. When he was a kid, he got the flu once a year like clockwork because his dad had told him that getting a flu shot just gave you the flu, so that never happened, so he got the flu. The feeling of drifting, of feeling like he was burning inside and chilled outside like some kind of reverse microwaved hot pocket, of having no real control over his thoughts, all of this was stuff James was familiar with. As he'd gotten older and started living on his own, he'd had to manage it in different ways. Usually he managed it by spending 3 days in bed, sleeping and waiting to feel properly hungry again. Later on, he dealt with it by getting a flu shot, on the grounds that if he was going to have the flu anyway, he may as well do it on his own timeline. Then he'd stopped getting the flu, mostly. But still, he knew the feeling of a bad fever, of that sort of hot delirium that ran his thoughts around and around in frantic manic circles until his mind collapsed into exhaustion. He'd only been sick once since he'd gotten his Akashic Sewer lesson in biology, up to multiple ranks in endurance. He'd almost felt sorry for the disease. It wasn't that it affected him less or anything, it was just that at no point did his body slow down or falter. He'd just pressed through, and being in near-peak condition the whole time had made the whole thing go by a lot faster. That and the purple orb that amped up his immune system. This time was different. The delirium snuck up on him fast, a matter of minutes. No chance for him to know that he was sick at all, really. No mild sore throat or clammy hands or anything to precede it. This felt less like being sick and more like being stabbed by a disease. This felt like an attack. He realized at a certain point he could barely keep a coherent thought going, and that his mind was already going in those circles. Then he passed out. He was mildly surprised when he woke up again at all. There were a few things that occurred to James in rapid succession. The first was that he was abruptly clear-headed. There was no gradual return to focus and consciousness. There was a cliff that he had plummeted off of and arrived back at a position where he could think properly at some point later. Second, someone was screaming again. Beneath the noise, he could also hear someone sobbing, another voice weakly and frantically praying for salvation. This was a bad sign, and he found himself springing to his feet like he hadn't just been out cold on the dirty floor of a cafe kitchen for who knew how long. The third thing he noticed was that his arms hurt. His shield bracers were slick, his shirt sleeves damp with his own blood. If it weren't for the fact that he had a lot more blood to spare than the average person, leaping up would have probably made him feel lightheaded. The last thing was the insistent piece of information waiting for his review. It sat, inert and obviously foreign, at the side of his thoughts, almost polite. Not something he could see, but something that was impatiently waiting for him to acknowledge it, so it could tell him something and then be on its way from his mind. James almost wanted to force himself to ignore it out of spite, but even that thought was enough. Survivor. Low. +2 skill points. Fascinating, and not what he had time to play with right now. He was out of the kitchen as soon as he was up, heading toward the source of the screaming and arming himself by grabbing a backpack on the floor on his way past in one hand. On his way out, he deftly hopped over the forms of the pair of med students he had tried to make comfortable, not having time to check if they were okay. The main area of the cafe was less dark than James had left it. An oozing gray light filtered through the windows and glass doors. Well, the windows that were intact, anyway. Through the strange, misty light, James could see several thick, rough roots that had crawled through the base of several windows, forcing their way through and shattering the glass into heavy chunks that littered the floor. He barely processed the fact that the roots seemed to be made entirely at 45-degree and 90-degree angles as he dashed around the corner and swept his eyes over the room. James had a number of purple orbs that changed the way he saw the world, though he tried to keep a grip on how he behaved at all times. When he let that grip slip on the purple effect that made his brain process things faster, it wasn't that he saw more, it was more that all the small connections between information threatened to overwhelm him. He'd been practicing, but it was still very, very hard to learn to live with that. But it still let him race through the scene he was presented with, especially with all the adrenaline helping. There were 3 people who weren't unconscious. All of the unconscious patrons, and Harlan, were either lying under tables or sitting in chairs while leaning forward onto the tables in front of them. One was passed out on a sofa, which was bizarre since the cafe did not have a sofa in it, and it looked like it had an upholstery pattern that matched the walls. Half of them, James could see, were breathing. That was good. The other half he could not tell. That was less good. There was a woman in a red cardigan that he could practically feel the itch of, nestled against a dividing wall under a table, crying. There was the man who had tried to call this a practical joke, sprawled on the smooth stone floor next to a chair he'd fallen out of, holding a crucifix in his hand and stuttering through a begging prayer. There was one of the baristas, screaming as a lumpy, bulbous, quadrupedal thing leaned over her and let one of its orbs split open to reveal teeth like iron nails. She was already surrounded by a trail of blood, and James could see her struggles getting weaker. He took this in over the course of half a second, and then he pivoted in his dash, kicking himself forward, and whipped the shoulder bag he was carrying out at the thing in a low arc that maximized how much force he could put into the swing. It connected with a wet crunch and the feeling of something heavy in the bag cracking. James gave a silent apology to whoever's laptop he had just destroyed as he yanked the strap back on the rebound, spun, and whipped the bag around again in another arc. The gross, bulbous dog thing had only just started to react to him slamming something into its head and was making some kind of low whine as the bag came back around and nailed it on the edge of the thing's face again. James didn't bother to follow up with the bag. Its momentum was too awkward now. Instead, he let it go with a practiced motion, grabbing one of the wooden chairs next to him and bringing it down as hard as he could on the staggered monster. One of the smooth orbs along its back popped open as he did so, spraying something vile into the air, but James didn't relent and just hit it again, the chair cracking as the screws holding the legs in place tore out of position through the wood. The furniture was never meant to be used as a weapon, but it gave him one more good hit as he slammed the thing back against the low wall under the broken window it had come through. Then, with a little space, James triggered the kick attack on the old status quo greave that he was wearing, and slammed his armored shin through its now vulnerable head. It popped like a ripe cantaloupe, and unleashed a smell like a far too overripe and rotten cantaloupe. The whole form went limp as it died suddenly, spasming in one rippling motion before it flopped down to the floor. James would take a closer look at that later. Over the smell of blood and whatever foul fluid was leaking from the broken and dead creature and onto his shoe, James felt something increment inside himself. Nowhere specific, just the feeling of a finished thing. Killer. Low. +1 skill point. Great, he scowled. Shit. Rapidly, he remembered what this thing had been doing here and quickly turned to check on the injured woman. Are you okay? No, that's stupid. Where did it get you? He asked, looking around for something he could use to stop the bleeding. There were some clean towels under the counter, he remembered, and he dashed to grab a couple and one of the dwindling supply of water bottles before running back. My leg, the barista was crying, the words slurred and almost incoherent. James pushed up the side of her skirt, revealing a legging that had been shredded and a jagged and bleeding chunk missing from her thigh. This hurts, she gasped out, babbling. Please do something, it hurts. Okay, you're all right. James saw the red marks on her arms, just like his, wet scabs forming over whatever wounds their rapid illness had inflicted on them. He looked around. Everyone whose arms he could see had those same marks on them. He'd have to check that later, too. Pouring water into her wound to at least wash some of it out, he pressed the towel to her injury and moved her hands into place. Alright, hold this here. Keep the pressure on. Fuck, that's bad. He tried not to think about how a wound like that needed to be stitched up by a professional, preferably with anesthetic and disinfectant. Not him, now. He needed help. At the very least, he could see if Johns was awake, get him to do it with more skill than James had. Briefly, James tried to see if he could make use of the skill points he had just gotten for spontaneously learning how to suture a wound, but if it was possible, it was a trick he didn't know yet. James got the attention of the two other people who were awake, having to snap his fingers a few times to get the guy to focus on him. He was clearly in shock in some way, and so James got him seated and let him be, while the sobbing woman, while obviously distressed, was at least capable of giving a nod and a tearful sniff when James got her to hold the makeshift bandage onto the barista's leg, just in case. Then he turned and ran for the back again. Johns, hey man, come on, I need your help here. James shook the EMT, who cracked an eye open at him. Stop yelling, Johns said in a dead tone. I'm here. Come on, you gotta help me, there's... James trailed off as he realized the other man had already woken up before he got here and shifted positions. What's up? He asked. Johns motioned a hand toward the guy next to him. He's dead, he said. They all are. That... James didn't know what to say. He didn't want to say anything. There weren't words for that kind of casual and abrupt encounter with mortality, for how fucking unfair it was that someone had thrown these people in here to die. They weren't kids exactly, but a lot of them were all James's age. What if that had been him? What if he'd been casually trying to scramble through college with his friends instead of delving a dungeon, and choosing to get coffee at the wrong time had just fucking killed him? I can't... There's no time. Some people made it, but one girl's bleeding bad. I don't know how to stitch a wound that well. Come on. I'm pretty sure I'm dead too, John said, not standing up from where he was sitting. Knees up by his chest, wrists idly resting on them. I got skill points. That's new to me. Seems like the kind of thing my brain would do right before I die. Never had much of a go into the light kind of vibe, you know? James took a sharp breath. Dude, I swear I will explain everything to you in 10 minutes, but could you get the fuck up and come help me? I don't have time for this right now. I need to go make sure there isn't anything crawling through the windows. Not helping, John said, still not standing, but at least looking up at James. James stuck a hand down to him. Come on, I'm not helping, but you can. There's people that need you. With a sigh, as he concluded that he wasn't actually dying, unfortunately, Johns let James haul him up and out to the injured woman. What the fuck is that thing? The man stopped behind James, pointing at the dead monster that he had left against the wall. Don't worry about it, James said, but he did realize that next to a corpse wasn't a great place for surgery, so while John started quietly asking the trembling and bleeding woman questions and getting what he needed out of his limited first aid kit, James hefted the thing and rolled it out the broken window, mindful of the rusty nails that it had for teeth. It was a bizarre life form, even for his standards. He had thought it was covered in bulbous growths, but it actually just was those growths. Squishy balls of muscle and fluid, wrapped in a rough skin that had the texture of a particularly uncomfortable couch James had once owned. There were absolutely bones of some kind in it, but each nodule of the monster seemed to serve a function, and they fused with each other where they had met to create a kind of grotesque wad of a living thing. He was being careful as he shoved it away, because the nails in its mouth were, in fact, nails. As in construction nails, finger length and slightly crooked. James didn't want to touch those at all, so the closest he got was to make sure that his shield bracers had registered them, just in case. James couldn't help but get a good feel for it as he hefted the creature up and out of the cafe to splatter onto the ground outside. It really did feel exactly like bad couch upholstery. While Johns worked getting the other woman to help him as he painfully sealed the chunk in the barista's thigh as best he could, James checked on everyone else. The big man with the cane who had said he had been an SCA member was gone. eyes glassy and empty as he stared out the window. Another man had seemingly bled out, his arms not just covered in sores, but further torn up like he'd been scratching at them. The other barista was just waking up, tears welling in the corner of her eyes, but at least she was alive. Aurelia was alive too, though still unconscious and breathing sporadically. The woman with the worn and studded face who had given water and painkillers to him was dead, and James felt a deep and painful guilt for that more than anyone else, that she could have lived if she had been a little more selfish with the few pills she had in her purse. One by one, James checked on people. There were, all told, 9 living humans in the cafe. 10 people if he counted Zhu, who had been dragged out of his manifestation when James passed out. The building was filling up with corpses far too fast for his liking. James considered moving them somewhere else, but where? One of the bathrooms, maybe? The idea fell apart when he realized just how heavy a body was. Humans were not light objects, and when one of them couldn't help you move itself, it looked like it would become rapidly too much effort to get all of them collected anywhere. Especially since the survivors had to leave. They had to. They couldn't stay here. This place was a death trap. Completely undefensible, especially with all the windows broken already anyway. At least if they started trying to make it out, they might find some of the dungeon's own magic to help keep them alive. It didn't help make the cafe feel safer when James noted that the wall near where the roots had punched through the windows was different than it used to be. He was really familiar with that cafe wall. He knew it didn't look like this. The low wall had risen up, the windows compressed. It was more like the kind of window you would see looking out of a kitchen in a home built in the 90s, not the big bay windows of the cafe. The material was still the same, but something was changing, subtly. One of the hanging lights overhead had similarly started to warp into the kind of dangling glass chandelier, albeit one made out of orange plastic, that the covering of the old lamp used to have. The dungeon was creeping in, and he still didn't know what it was. At least it was lighter outside, however much time had passed having brought them out of the night, maybe. He started trying to make a mental list of what they could do to prepare. Pack up the food that was left here, including all the water bottles. Break off some chair legs to use as clubs, maybe. Consider killing Harlan out of anger before they woke up. The last one was mostly a joke, and James was too late for that anyway, unfortunately. "You move wrong," Harlan said by way of greeting, looking at James from where they were leaning against a wall next to a dead power socket. They were in the process of pocketing a notepad and a little clamshell case, James having barely caught them flipping through it for something specific, maybe. James bit back a wince or a scowl or something like that. "Oh good, we're up to the part of our burgeoning friendship where you say rude things and think it's fine. Great, love it." Harlan didn't seem to take any implication at all from that. "You jerk around too much. Thought you were just spun up for some reason, but it's not that, is it? You're messed up." James blinked slowly. "You thought I came to a meeting with a potentially hostile and unknown group while high on... I actually don't know drug slang. I'm sorry. What does that one mean? No, never mind. I decided I don't care." He gently clapped his hands together a couple of times. "I've got a thing that makes me accelerate faster. It's actually the least convenient superpower because I'm constantly having to moderate and hold back how fast I move. I'm more or less used to it by now. I get a lot of practice in, so I can use it when I really need it, but yeah, sometimes my random pacing is going to look weird. Deal with it." There was a brief pause while Harlan gave James a truly worried look for the first time. "How many different alterations do you have?" they asked. "Like sum total or different sources?" James continued without waiting for clarification. "Because I can't answer the first one, and depending on how you count, 7 to 12, I guess. I can't actually remember if I'm currently resistant to venom. That one changes sometimes. Let's not test it." He appraised Harlan, who was now giving him an unrestrained, horrified look, their lack of any retained experience with social situations making them comically easy to read when things went off script. You don't, do you? Have nearly that many. You know about a half-dozen dungeons, and you don't... Why?" James was truly puzzled as he realized what was going on. All I know is I'm not supposed to. Because you told yourself, huh? James was trying too hard to be civil with Harlan. Here, now, they absolutely could not afford to be enemies, or even mildly antagonistic to each other, but boy was Harlan making it a challenge. They nodded. It was a long time ago. It's one of the most important parts of the wolf pack. They held out an arm, flexing fingers as they stared at the black cloth covering of their sleeve. James knew they were really thinking of another tattoo underneath, either that or the lesions they probably had. Ink, cordite, a couple other small things we know are safe. Everything else is off the table. A risk, maybe, or something worse. It doesn't matter. It's the one thing above anything else that we pass down that has to be trusted. So, the skill points you just got, then? Won't use them. Usually there's a way to feed it into the bullets anyway. Harlan shrugged, running their hands along their sleeves without showing any reaction to if that hurt with the open sores underneath. They rose to their feet quietly. What now? Now we get moving, James said, motioning through the shattered window. The roots weren't growing visibly, and outside was shrouded in mist, but it was still the best chance any of them had. Zhu, are you still... He realized he'd forgotten to check on his companion. Zhu folded into place on James's arm. A simple line of feathers and eyes and small holes in his own limb. Tired, he said. That hurt, and... What are skill points? Zhu sounded confused. A mystery, James grunted, though the fact that Zhu got skill points was alarming. Was Zhu sick too? Zhu, we need a path, James said. Can't. The navigator did not sound like he couldn't. He sounded pleading, like he didn't want to. This place is wrong. It hurts to try to map. James sympathized. It hurt to be here, and he had only been here for around an hour plus however long he'd been out. We can't stay here, he said again, softly, coaxingly. I have to at least try to get these people out, and shit, I don't want to die here and take you with me either. You don't have to get us to the exit, just somewhere less dangerous. Can you do that? There was a stretched out silence from Zhu, punctuated by a stifled scream as Johns attempted field surgery on the wounded barista, and the injured girl's coworker tried to distract her with a stream of empty words and reassurances. I can try, Zhu decided. I will try, but it costs when I do this, don't you know? Sort of, James said. Should have talked about this more. Should have listened to Daniel more. Do you know what it'll cost? Maps resist being made real, resist with strange coincidences and roadblocks. I know what will happen in the abstract, but knowing anything specific about a route is part of a route, the rocket fuel problem across an atlas. Zhu's words were either semi-cryptic or semi-delirious, but James got it. If it cost him adding problems to a trip to know about the trip, then the more he tried to know how many problems would be there, the more problems would spawn. Should I begin? Zhu asked. James shook his head, feeling dizzy at the remnants of the fever that jostled loose. Wait until we're out the door, he said. Give me some time to get everybody together. He got to work organizing what he could. He set two people, the man who had given up on praying by this point, and the dude with a goatee, dressed as close to normal as James had ever seen a human, to work gathering every bit of food in this building and packing it into bags. They were both not doing well. And really, how could anyone be doing well, surrounded by corpses like this? They're all dead, the goatee guy kept repeating, his eyes unfocused, swaying on his feet, before James put him to work. James didn't know how to help, except to shove them into action, give them a task, and get them out of here. Make sure to split everything evenly, so if we lose one, we don't go hungry, James told them. Try not to make anything too heavy, and yes, I am aware God has abandoned us here. I am working on it. His reply to one of the man's dazed and muttered comments seemed to snap him out of his stupor. It was especially unfortunate that weight wasn't going to be a problem when it came to water. Even with the uninjured barista pointing out that they did have at least part of a pallet still in the back, they had maybe a dozen bottles total, after Johns had used quite a bit of it for his impromptu surgery. It was something, but it wasn't really a lot. James got Aurelio to start breaking off chair legs and wrapping them in cloth to use as clubs, while he started going around to the dead. The man stared after him after the third time he pulled out one of the deceased's wallets from their pockets or purse. "Are you looting everyone?" He sounded partway between curious and disgusted. Without looking at him, James fanned out and held up the stack of plastic cards in his hands. "IDs," he said. "For when we get out of here," he added, and said nothing else about it. These people had lives and families and friends. They couldn't just vanish and be forgotten. He wouldn't let them. James collected their driver's licenses or whatever was close enough, and anything that looked deeply personal. Wedding rings, lockets, a couple of folded photos, and phones. Those went in a bag. Lightweight personal electronics got heavy when you were carrying around 20 of them. Soon enough, there was nothing left to do except wait for Johns to finish trying to repair the hole in the woman he was helping. James moved over to stand by them, looking out the windows into the gray mist that covered everything around. The world was lit now, but visibility was only barely better than it had been at night. "How is she?" he asked. "Out cold. Alive," Johns said. "It's good this place has orange juice because she lost a lot of blood." "But she'll live, right?" the other barista asked. "Sorry, what was your name?" James cut in. "I know I should know by now, but—" "Zari. And why would you know?" She seemed almost confused by the question, though still looked worriedly at her coworker. Friend, maybe? James shrugged. "I'm basically here all the time. I know half your coworkers by name," he admitted. "Anyway, more importantly, can we move her?" he asked Johns. The man shook his head. "She can't walk, at least," he explained. "And, I don't know, man, can you slap together a stretcher?" "Probably," James said, thinking about it. "But isn't there a cart in the back for deliveries, like that green metal thing?" Zari nodded at him. "Okay, stick her on that. Steal some of the mystery couch cushions. Hell, get Harlan's stupid tiger to pull it." "What? Tiger?" "Harlan, call out your Pokemon. We gotta get going," James called by way of an answer. Getting Harlan to agree took the most time, followed shortly by rigging up a harness and getting the tiger to agree. He was actually pretty on board with the whole process. While everyone worked on that, James headed out the back door and walked the perimeter of the cafe, gun at hand. It was quiet, and he really wanted to mentally add, too quiet. The building, he noted, was changing on the outside. The materials were mostly the same, but the stone overhang on the patio was being pulled back to look more like slanted residential roofing. What was left of the stone patio itself was being broken into cobblestones, not a flat paved surface. It was obvious the dungeon was doing something, making this place look more like a house than a business, but it was doing it in a way that felt like erosion. It was very creepy. Creepier was the fact that as he took careful steps and watched the surroundings for anything hostile, or the source of the strange roots punching through the building, he thought he saw flickers in the gray mist around him. Motion, but never approaching or threatening or even really something he could pin down. As he turned around to the side of the building, where it would have had a thin gap between the next restaurant over, and now just had open space and half a fence, he spotted two things in quick succession. First, and vitally important, was one of those bulbous dogs. It was standing near the dumpster, sniffing at it with several of its flesh orbs that appeared to have intake holes, like it was covered in noses. Well, it was near what used to be the dumpster. It was still a set of garbage cans made of the same thick and rusted metal and heavy plastic cap that the dumpster had been, but it had changed. It was still changing, really, along with the wall behind it. It It was in the process of warping into something else, though as James got a good look at it, he could literally see the changes slow to a crawl. That was enough to get the dog to whip its head around toward him, opening a mouth to show a row of rusted nail teeth. It looked like it was going to make a noise. James preempted it, making his own, and shot it 3 times in different orbs, popping them like rotted fruit and toppling the creature to the ground. A weak scream came from behind him in the cafe at the gunshots, but James would reassure them later. Killer. Low. +1 skill point. The changes stopped crawling, and just stopped. And James started to put together what was going on. A long, long time ago, one dungeon had asked him to save another one, as a personal favor. What he now knew to be Route Horizon had told him to remove what she, called poison from Officia Mundi. She'd been talking about people, not property, but the point remained that something from outside couldn't stay in a dungeon forever without either hurting it or changing. Or, perhaps, by being a delver, by being involved. The cafe wasn't involved, absolutely not, so it was just sitting here, waiting, poisoning the dungeon. Maybe if they defended it long enough, it would kill the place. A fitting end for this shithole that spewed a disease at them at its earliest convenience. The other piece of information he had was that dungeons could, and did, change things. They warped their environments to screw with people. But, as James had seen when the Akashic Sewer had been kicked out of its home turf, they couldn't do it instantly. They couldn't do it for free. And it seemed like things, such as humans watching them, slowed the process down. Which he now had another piece of data to start to confirm, judging by how this had just happened. Why the dungeon needed one of its orb dogs here to enact changes, he wasn't really sure. But killing it had certainly stopped the process for now. But did that mean more of them are going to be coming? This place, if it's a problem for the dungeon, it's not going to leave it alone, is it? James asked. Would you? Zhu curiously replied. No, I shoot most of my problems, James admitted. I mean, okay, that's not even close to true, but I am getting uncomfortable with how comfortable I am at shooting my problems. Zhu flicked orange ethereal feathers up at James's chin. Humans are bizarre, he said, as if he weren't copying half his mannerisms from James directly. Also, I think I am ready, if you are. Yeah, James said, looking out into the mist around them. Those things he could only see as shapes last night were more easily visible now. Telephone poles, or maybe cell towers, something like that, a crowded cluster of them near where the cafe had landed. As he rounded to the front and pulled open the door to let himself back in, he could see an off-white sidewalk and a perfectly normal strip of asphalt across from where the building had landed. And beyond it, the shapes of houses, barely visible through the mist, but there. 2-story, 2-car garage, suburban cookie-cutter structures, peaked roofs and dark windows. There was something twisted about their normalcy. But the mist ebbed and moved, and James lost sight of the distant buildings. I hate this place, he muttered, before raising his voice to the survivors. All right, everybody use the bathroom before we get going. And this isn't a joke, because I will bet money that no one is going to like whatever bathrooms this place has made.